Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. We're continuing our little series on the book of Genesis, hoping you're using these as devotionals and maybe even conversation starters with some friends or groups of people. Just a reminder today, as we go through Genesis 4, it's important to keep this story in its proper perspective. So Genesis 4, the story of Cain and Abel, follows the creation story where God looks at everything God makes and God says it is good over and over again until God creates humanity. God looks at humanity along with everything else together and God says it is very good. Just a reminder that when God looks at you, even on your worst days, when you've got, toothpaste still stuck in the corner of your mouth and you got that stuff stuck in your eye and who knows where that came from and there's broccoli in your teeth, even then, God says, you are very good. Of course, Genesis 1 gives way to Genesis 2 and 3. It's the story of Adam and Eve, and then eventually what is ultimately called the fall, where Adam and Eve have one prohibition. They cannot eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And of course, what's the first thing they do? They eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve are clothed by God, but they're banished from the Garden of Eden. They move east of Eden. And eventually, in Genesis chapter 4, they give birth to two sons, Cain and Abel. This story unfolds rather quickly, as is often the case in the Bible. The kids grow up awfully fast. Next thing we know, they're young men, maybe 16, 17, 18 years old. The Bible doesn't tell us for sure. And a funny thing happens. Both Cain and Abel bring offerings to God. Now, God doesn't demand this. God doesn't even ask for this. Just spontaneously, both Cain and Abel bring offerings to God. And we're thinking, wow, this couldn't be going any better. And then the strange part happens. God prefers Abel's offering to Cain's. And we aren't told why. Cain and Abel both brought what they had to offer God. Cain is a farmer, so he brought crops. Abel is a shepherd, so he brought sheep. For centuries, Christian theologians have been wondering, why did God prefer Abel's offering to Cain's? There's all sort of speculative answers, that one was offered in faith, one was not, but that's not what Genesis says. Some people have said, well, maybe God just likes shepherds better than farmers. I don't think that's true. Some have argued God prefers meat over vegetables. Again, I don't think there's anything in Genesis. I mean, if you gave me a choice between a meat lover's pizza and a big salad, I'm going to choose the meat lover's pizza. But again, that's not in the Bible. Some of us have argued that maybe, just maybe, God prefers the youngest child in the family, that he or she has a special place in God's heart. I think that might be true, but my older siblings would probably say I'm mistaken on that. Again, we don't know why God prefers Abel's offering to Cain. In fact, it doesn't seem fair, which is the point of the story. When life isn't fair, and there's always those situations, right? When life isn't fair, how do you respond? Because this is what God says to Cain. Cain, be careful. Sin is lurking at your door. You must master it. Sin is lurking at your door. Now, this is the first time in the Bible that the word sin is actually used. It's going to be utilized oftentimes in the Bible, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's a variety of meanings. Sometimes it's talking about a state of being. Sometimes it's talking about a person's actions or inactions. But I find it significant that the first sin that is named in the Bible, called sin, is jealousy, or what the church has traditionally called envy. I think that means something significant. I think it means that jealousy or that being envious is something that it's always lurking there for us. And when it attacks us, when sin comes into our life in this form, I think it has a special power in our life. And what I mean by that is I think envy or being jealous, I think it does three things to us. I think it blinds us. I think envy isolates us. And I think envy lies to us. And here's what I mean. Envy blinds Cain. He has all sorts of options at this point in the story. God wasn't overly pleased with his offering. He was more pleased with Abel's. So what are Cain's options? Well, he could probably go and chat with God about this. He could, wake up tomorrow morning and figure out a plan to move forward. He could spend his afternoons daydreaming about how he is going to be a blessing to others. Cain has lots of options, but he doesn't see a single one of them. Every day, instead of thinking about all of his options, he just keeps looking at Abel with a look of frustration, just a sneer on his face. When he's crunching his cereal, when he's gnashing his lunch, he just keeps looking at Abel over and over and over again. He can't see anything else but what his brother has somehow done to him. That's what it does. It blinds us to our options, and it isolates us. The more frustrated he grows with Abel, who, remember, has done nothing wrong, the less he feels inclined to see Abel as his brother, and more likely he sees Abel as his adversary. And that's what happens. Little by little, he stops seeing his brother as a fellow child of God, as his brother. Instead, he sees him as his competition, if you will. And then finally, envy lies to us. This is the part of the story you need to understand. The truth is that our deepest, darkest fears are almost always the result of our insecurities. Let me say that again. Our deepest, darkest fears are almost always the result of our own insecurities. But what envy does, what jealousy does, is it tricks us. Instead of owning those, acknowledging them, saying confessing these are my insecurities, what envy does is it blames someone else. In Cain's case, his insecurities are something that he should be talking to God about. Instead, he simply blames his brother. It's Abel's fault. If Abel wouldn't have done this, if Abel wouldn't have done that, that's what envy does. It lies to Cain. And of course, this has consequences. Envy always has consequences in our lives. Now, I'll give you a story, an illustration from my life from years ago. I had this saintly grandmother on my father's side. For Christmas, she came to me one year and she said, "Justin, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to pick out a present for your cousin Mark." I thought, well, of course I would do that. Mark was a year or two younger than me. Sure, grandmother, I would love to do this. We all knew grandma was getting to the stage in life where, with all the grandkids she had, it was kind of hard for her to keep track of whose size was what toy they would like. And so grandma was starting to give, 6-year-olds presents that were more fitting for a 16-year-old and vice versa. So this seemed like a great solution. I was going to pick out a present for my younger cousin Mark. And I said, well, what would you like? And grandma got a big smile on her face and she said, "He just started collecting those G.I. Joe figures that you like so much." I was so excited. If there was one thing at this point in my life that I understood, I had a passion for G.I. Joe figures. So I said, "Grandma, which one do you want me to get him? Buzzkill, Duke himself, Snyder, who Roadblock, who do you want me to get?" And grandma just said this: "Get the one you would most like to have." Well, that was an easy choice. What Snake Eyes was the one. Everyone who collected G.I. Joes in the 1980s know there was one G.I. Joe figure who was greater than all the others: Snake Eyes. But the problem is he was so popular you could never find him in stores. And then it happened. That week, I went to the store with my parents. I ran back to the toy section where the G.I. Joe figures were. I knew the path quite well. And sure enough, right there in the middle of the display, there was one guy, Snake Eyes, staring right back at me. This ninja assassin who'd taken a vow of silence. He had his swords there. Oh, I had dreamed of having Snake Eyes forever. I had never even seen him in a store before. Immediately, I grabbed it. He was the only one. Again, I looked through all the figures. It was the only one there. I was so delighted. And then suddenly it dawned on me. This wasn't for me. This was for my cousin Mark. And suddenly, I started to imagine what that was going to be like. Of course, I could have had options, right? I could have gone to my parents and said, "I've always wanted this one. Do you think I could borrow it? Could it be an early Christmas present? Could I use some of my money that I have at home? I promise to pay you back." But I didn't see those options. No. The thought of Mark playing with Snake Eyes on Christmas Day was too much. I just knew what was going to happen. He would take out his new guy, and he would go to battle with all of my guys, and I might have had 30 or 40 G.I. Joe figures, but then there's no way they could compete with the ninja assassin named Snake Eyes, and it was just going to be devastating. And more I thought about this, and I just thought, no. Finally, as my parents came around the corner saying it's time to go, I put Snake Eyes back, and instead I grabbed someone else. In fact, I didn't even grab a real G.I. Joe figure. I grabbed a generic, he was called Driver Guy. His arms and legs didn't even move. He was a G.I. Joe knockoff. And my parents came to me and said, did you pick one out? And I said, oh yeah, here it is. And my mom asked me, is that the one that you would want the most? And I told my mom, absolutely. And so we went to the front of the store, we paid for it, and I walked out. And I felt a little bad about myself, but I was thinking, Mark doesn't deserve it. He just started collecting G.I. Joes. Why would he get the best one after collecting for just a couple months? This is something, he should have to earn Snake Eyes, right? Now, if you're thinking, Pastor Justin, that's an awful story. That doesn't say much about how you were as a child. To which I respond, I know. But sometimes, actually always, sin, especially the sin of jealousy, the sin of envy, it has consequences. Sometimes those consequences play out in the world and the lives of others, and sometimes they come back to haunt us. In my case, it happened on Christmas Day. The family had gathered together and we were opening presents, and I noticed that everyone else had 2 presents to open. They had an article of clothing from Grandma and then some sort of toy or something like that. I only had one. I had a shirt or a sweatshirt that I opened, and I sat there with a smile on my face, but deep down I was thinking, where's my other present? This isn't fair. And then I was feeling a little guilty, so I looked towards Mark, and I wondered if he was enjoying this knockoff G.I. Joe figure, and I saw the strangest thing. Mark had a sweatshirt, but he was also playing with a new truck, clearly a truck he had just gotten from my grandmother. And before I knew what happened, my grandmother came to me with a big smile on her face, and she said, as she handed me this present with very familiar wrapping paper, here's something that I know you are going to enjoy. And before I even looked at that present in her hand, I knew what had happened. When my grandmother said, pick out the one you want most, it was because I was picking out my own present. I could have had Snake Eyes. Instead, I had generic Driver Guy. I never did get Snake Eyes. Now, people of God, that's a pretty humorous story, but the example I share with you is to tell you that envy, it has consequences. Sometimes it's consequences for us, but it's often consequences for our relationships with the people around us. Sometimes it's trivial, like getting the wrong G.I. Joe figure, and sometimes it's not. In the 4th chapter of Genesis, what happens is Cain becomes so envious of his brother, so blind to his options, so isolated from his brother, so willing to give into the lies of envy that he goes out and he lures Abel out into the field and he kills his brother. That's the power of envy. I share this story with you not because if you don't conquer envy, your siblings are going to be in mortal danger, but I share this story with you today to say that it has consequences. And remember how envy works. Envy works on preying on your deepest, darkest insecurities. So next time you feel envy, next time you feel jealousy stirring in your heart, just remember that your deepest, darkest insecurities, they've already been addressed by the person of Jesus. If you're worried about being lonely, remember Jesus promises, I am always with you. If you're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, remember Jesus owns the future. If you're worried about something you have done in your past, remember Jesus speaks words of forgiveness and wholeness to you each and every day. Whatever your insecurity is, know this, Jesus has it covered. And if you start your day with that, if you remember that Jesus has you, and whatever your insecurity is, Jesus addresses it, then that takes away the space for envy and jealousy to grow in your life. And trust me, that will have even greater consequences in your life and in your relationships with the people you love the most. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.